So I could probably count on one hand the number of people I've encountered in the oil and gas industry who I would call lazy. By and large, most people in oil and gas are hardworking, sometimes to a fault. And sure, I've encountered people that are burned out, or that might be frustrated, or just turned in their 2 weeks notice, and maybe their motivation isn't quite there, but in their DNA, they're anything but lazy. And so those people, you people in this audience, I know, can listen to this message today, because this message is going to be about maybe embracing a little bit of laziness, embracing some unconventional motivational thinking, some unconventional mindsets that might challenge this 110% at all times mentality that you might have. And again, this isn't a message that's suitable for everyone, hence the tongue-in-cheek disclaimer here that this message is for mature audiences only. This is not a message I would share with my children, for example, who I'm trying to foster hardworking, ethic and go get it. And, you want to shoot for your dreams and realize your full potential. You want that in impressionable children. And out of context, hearing someone say, well, maybe you need to lower the bar. Maybe you need to take a break. Maybe you need to give up. Maybe you need to slow down. Obviously, out of context, that could be very dangerous. But again, for this audience, for those in oil and gas who are, by and large, hard-working individuals, this message hopefully helps you realize that sometimes your approach can be unsustainable. Sometimes all of the content that's out there, whether it's books or LinkedIn posts or quotes or motivational speeches or podcasts or whatever it happens to be, sometimes those things can give you a little boost and move you forward, but in many cases, they're not sustainable. In fact, they represent the volatility that we have in the oil and gas industry. They might give you a little bit of hit, but we have enough ups and downs. We know full well the toll that those ups and downs can take on individuals, on companies, personal lives and professional lives. And if you're doing that from a leadership standpoint, if you're ingesting this material that just gives you a little bit to lurch forward and you're looking for, the next piece, well, again, that's not sustainable. But for many individuals who have heard for their entire lives and who have exercised this unsustainable work ethic, it can be dangerous. So again, with that disclaimer out of the way, I do want to talk through some unconventional thinking and help you find a sustainable way to introduce the occasional laziness, if you will, to lower the bar on occasion, to slow down without sacrificing your reputation as being a hard worker and as being anything but lazy. So with all that being said, hello and welcome to the Energy Detox, a petroleum-based blend of leadership conversations guaranteed to boost your professional and personal output by flushing away the hidden and often toxic barriers to peak performance. I'm your host, Joe Sinnott, a chemical engineer, executive coach, and 15-year energy industry veteran, helping you tap into the same resources fueling today's most successful and sustainable leaders. And today, we're going to talk about how those successful leaders avoid being overwhelmed by all of the well-intentioned material out there to help them be better leaders, to help motivate them, to help push them and in turn push their teams to achieve their fullest potential. All well-meaning things, but all of which can be dangerous if not taken in context and if not approached consciously. And so today I invite you, if you're watching live in the comments, to share some of those pieces of advice that you might find to be somewhat dangerous, if you will, when misapplied, or when a leader is touting them, again, without any context and doing it unconsciously, such that their stakeholders get burned out, get tired, and don't produce the long-term results that you and your organization are looking to produce. Because I've heard on occasion the idea of short-term sustainability. Well, what the hell is short-term sustainability? It's nothing. It's stupid. And if you're embracing tools or people that are giving you short boosts that just get you from A to B when you should be focused on Z to a certain extent, that's what you're getting paid to do, that's what your ultimate goal is, well, again, you're asking for trouble. That's not the way to sustain a career, and it's not the way to sustain a personal life. And in this episode, we're going to weave in my own personal life and hopefully some elements of yours, because in fact, this episode was inspired in large part by the advice, or maybe lack of advice, that my wife and I got when our twins showed up just about 3 years ago. And at the time, we had 2 older children, and what we found in all of the various parenting advice and books, which we were somewhat well-versed in, having had other children, is that most of the advice was impractical for us having 2-year-old twins and still managing 2 other kids. And some of the best advice we ultimately got, not from a book, not from a podcast, but from individuals, was lower your bar, lower your standards. Your goal is long-term, not short-term. And if your kids need to watch a little extra TV or have pizza or macaroni and cheese for the 5th day in a row, so be it, if it allows you as a parent to maintain some level of sanity so that you're actually around in 3, 4, 5 years, let alone 20 years, and you're not completely burned out. So again, with that being said, I do encourage you to share any comments you have. I also encourage you, if you wish, to go to despair.com and check out some of their demotivators. There's a link here in the comments already for this post that brings you to some humorous takes, some alternate takes, some unconventional takes on those motivational posters that you may have seen at offices or perhaps you even have one hanging up in your home. So if that's the case, I don't want to insult you, but I do encourage you to go there. And if there's any that strike you as humorous, feel free to share them in the comments. And towards the end of this year, I'd be happy to try and weave some of those into the conversation. And along those lines, and one final point here on the introduction is, I want to thank John Stansberry of International Snubbing Solutions, who commented before this broadcast, if you will. And he brought up an analogy that I thought was perfectly captured what we're going to be talking about today. And that comes from the world of music, where you have symphonies with multiple instruments that are all brought together to form some sort of beautiful piece of music. Whereas you have cacophonies, on the other hand, which is the opposite. You have lots of disparate noises, if you will. Some of them might sound like music individually. Some of them might sound halfway pleasant individually. But when all brought together, it's overwhelming. Again, it sounds like our house once in a while when all of the kids are screaming. And when it comes to all these leadership messages, all of the motivational tactics that are out there, and again, books and seminars and quotes and whatever else you use, it can be like a cacophony. It can be overwhelming. Individually, some of those things might be good, but as they all start floating around in your brain, they make anything but beautiful music. And so we want to avoid that today. We want to help you enjoy the symphony, if you will. And we want to point out, again, all of the dangers that can come when you over-embrace some of these things. Again, hence the mature audience's warning here that we have on this episode. Because again, this message is not for everyone, and it might not be for you at all times. But sometimes it is. And that's what it's all about, being a conscious leader, is recognizing those times when maybe you need some unconventional messages. So thank you to John for kicking off the conversation. And without further ado, we'll jump into the first quote, if you will, that I think summarizes what some people are afraid to say. And that is, efficiency is organized laziness. And I don't know who David Dunham is. In fact, I didn't know who he was 20 years ago when I actually decided to choose this as my yearbook quote in high school. So senior year, for whatever reason, this is the quote I chose. Efficiency is organized laziness. And why? Well, I think like a lot of high school kids, I made sure I had plenty of fun and plenty of shenanigans and all of that, but yet I was still able to achieve decent results. And well, how do you do that? Well, it's being resourceful to a certain degree. It's being efficient. And efficiency sometimes can make it look like you're doing things easy, or it might look like you're condensing the things you need to do and still having lots of fun. Whatever the case is, and wherever I chose that quote, the reality is it's still pressing today for a lot of people like you who are afraid to work extra hard, who aren't afraid to put in 110%, or again, whatever trite expression you want to say. But the reality is that a lot of what you have done throughout your career is summed up by another, again, I don't know who David Dunham is, but Wayne Dyer is someone who was well known in the leadership world and the motivational world. And one of the things he said was, don't pole vault over mouse turds. In other words, don't spend all of your time on things that don't really make a difference. And sure, you might come across as lazy because you're not burning the midnight oil every single night. And there's a time and a place to burn the candle at both ends, burn the midnight oil, whatever the heck you're going to do. But the reality is, if you're pole vaulting over mouse turds when you don't need to be, it's not sustainable. And moving into the energy world, I think this quote, this idea of efficiency was summed up in an episode of the Crude Life morning show, which if you don't listen to The Crude Life, I recommend you do, because last week they had an interview with Steve Hines, and Steve has been around, and Steve opines on lots of energy related things. But one of the things I heard him say on that podcast just last week was how efficiency can be a source of new energy. Now, obviously in this energy transition, we talk about how we're going to have new sources of energy, green energy, whatever it is, hydrogen, all kinds of fancy things that we probably can't even imagine now. And those are going to provide new energy. But he made a very great point, which was efficiency, doing the things that we already are tasked with doing better and more efficiently, is in and of itself a new source of energy. And in oil and gas, certainly, we've become much more efficient in our operating styles. And what has that led to? Well, it's led to more bang for your buck, if you will. And so too in your personal life. Before you try to transform yourself, before you sign up for some new class or program or coach or whatever it happens to be, take a step back and make sure that you're not trying to reinvent yourself. Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes you need transformation, but sometimes you need to extract the resources that you already have under your feet. That's the quickest way to make an impact, and it's the most surefire way to avoid an unsustainable approach that can leave you burned out or can leave you overinvested in some new endeavor that doesn't actually make a difference. So again, avoid those huge swings. Avoid the need to go on sabbatical every so often or take a 2-week vacation. As great as that is, if you find yourself so burned out that you need those long periods of time, maybe something's amiss. And ask yourself that. Are you pole vaulting over mouse turds? Or do you recognize that a proper view of efficiency is, something that might have you looking lazy because you get to leave the office at 2 p.m. once in a while, but in reality, you're getting the job done that needs to get done and preserving your energy so that you can sustain a long, healthy, happy, productive career. Moving on to the next theme, if you will, play like a runner-up today. Yes, if you're familiar with Notre Dame, then you may have seen this sign here, play like a champion today. But today we're talking about play like a runner-up today. And yes, in fairness, Notre Dame, my alma mater, hasn't won a football national championship in 3 decades. And nobody really wants to be a runner-up, let alone a perennial runner-up like the Buffalo Bills of the early 90s or, I'd say the Pittsburgh Pirates. They haven't been a runner-up in about 3 decades as well. They've been far less than that. But typically, from a sports standpoint, you want to win championships, right? That's why you're in it, to win. And in business, so too, we hear all about winning, and that's great. But there are times when a short-term victory could be detrimental to long-term success. And there are times when just trying to win might have you lose sight of what your ultimate objective is. And again, a good parallel to this was 2 years ago when Chevron lost, if you will, was the runner-up to Occidental when Oxy got Anadarko. Oxy outbid Chevron, won Anadarko. Chevron had a chance to come back, and they said, no thanks. In fact, at the time, some analysts said, Chevron, they had won this reputation for being fiscally responsible. That was a hard-fought victory, if you will. And they didn't want to lose that. And in fact, as being the runner-up, Chevron walked away with $1 billion. Not a bad runner-up prize. They preserved some sort of maybe integrity is not the word, but they preserved their consistency and they preserved some reputation with investors, and they, moved on and Oxy got Anadarko, and we all know how that played out over the last 2 years. And again, whether it would have made sense for Chevron to outbid and pay a couple $1 billion more, I don't know. But in that particular case, being a runner-up, wasn't such a bad idea. So that's a question that doesn't just apply to large corporations, but to individuals within corporations, perhaps to you. And one of the best examples of this is people who strive to be CEO. I remember when I first started with Schlumberger, the first day of work there in our first orientation session, people were going around and I think they were asked what their long-term career goals or something along those lines. I remember one guy saying, I want to be CEO of Schlumberger. Think, all right, hey, good for him. Company of whatever it was at the time, 100,000 people, and he wants to be CEO. Great. And I don't know if anybody actually asked him why, but as I work with leaders, That's a big question. Whether you want to be CEO or aspire to some particular position, you need to know why. Is being champion of a company, if you will, for lack of a better term, your ultimate goal? Or is it something else? Is it to, again, be productive? Is it to make a good enough living that you can still pay the bills and do so comfortably and, go have multiple houses and whatever the case might be, while also preserving what's important to you outside of work? And again, I'm not going to talk about work-life balance. That's a topic that, again, you can get no shortage of books and podcasts on, but particularly for those who are interested in being a CEO, is that really what you want? Are you willing to make those sacrifices? Do you understand what that entails? Do you understand that for many people, it is lonely at the top, if you will? There are trade-offs. And if you don't realize that, then you know what? Maybe coming in second place, if you will, coming on a rung or two below CEO is your sweet spot. And that's okay. But you need to recognize that. And you need people around you to recognize that. You need people around you who might say, you have the most potential possible to be CEO, and whether they build up your head or they build up your confidence or whatever it is, you find yourself down that path when you don't want to be on that path. And I had a client last year who was you could say he would have been a prototypical CEO. He checked all of the boxes. Super intelligent, diverse experience, well-spoken, could present better than anyone else I know. All of these things have him well positioned to be a CEO, and maybe he will be someday. But in working with him, we took somewhat of an unconventional approach, and he wound up taking an unconventional path that removes him from anything you would think or most people would have pushed him to do. Why? Because being CEO wasn't his end goal. That wasn't an end in and of itself. It was far more than that. But having someone around to sort through all of the noise and to help you avoid taking many, many steps down that path when you don't want to be down that path is important. So ask yourself, do you want to be a champion in whatever you're doing, or you content with being runner-up and getting paid $1 billion in the case of Chevron, if you will? And again, one, final note on this, of course, is, in working with lots of technical people, of course, there's a strong desire to win. Whether you're working on a new program or a code, you want to be the best. But again, in many of the people that I've worked with, what they find is that the building blocks that they've put in place and the things they've done, in many cases, have set them up for long-term success and, not the short-term victory. So again, a slight divergence there, but when it comes to many of the technical people that I've worked with, this is a very important message. Whether or not they have aspirations of being CEO, but whatever it is that they want to build, whatever company they want to build or program, whatever idea they have, there is a sweet spot there of being second best, being under the radar, being the best kept secret. That's not the right business approach for everybody. But when you're building something new, you want to know where you want to play. You might want to play in that middle space. And again, that applies in all other industries, but it's something I hear more and more, especially with a lot of people coming out of oil and gas who have this entrepreneurial spirit and who are in the data world and, they want to build the best XYZ. Well, sometimes through conversations, building the best XYZ or being known as the best XYZ, as counterintuitive as it might sound, might not provide the most sustainable results. Moving on to the next item here. Strive for mediocrity. So talked about my high school mindset, if you will, as far as the idea of efficiency, essentially just being intelligent laziness or organized laziness. We moved on to college years where, despite not witnessing any championships, Notre Dame still proudly displays their play like a championship sign. And now moving away from college and to my time with Schlumberger, strive for mediocrity. That was what I was told when I asked my mentor shortly into my time at Schlumberger for some advice. I said, hey, I'm starting off my career. What advice do you have? We're sitting on the first rig I was out on. It was Jack Up, the High Island 4 in the Gulf of Mexico. And he says, strive for mediocrity. That was his advice. Strive for mediocrity. Now, again, you talk about a dangerous message to share with someone. Now, again, in his mind, the idea was, you want to be under the radar. You don't want to rock the boat. And I get it. But again, going back to the mature audience's warning for this episode, out of context, that could be somewhat dangerous. That's not exactly the type of thing you want to share with certain audiences. And, I think I took that with a grain of salt. I think I recognized at the time that, that's probably not something that I want to take to heart and print out t-shirts about. But as I've gone through my career, I try to be mindful of those times where I might be unwittingly coming across as telling someone to strive for mediocrity. In fact, last year I was giving a talk to a group of high school students. I was asked to talk about my career in oil and gas and executive coaching and weaving all that stuff together. And I started talking about how, in college I didn't have, the best grades and my internships weren't great. And, I maybe I didn't push myself as hard as I could have in my technical classes and all these things that kind of not the type of things you exactly want to beat your chest about. But ultimately, how it all worked out, because had I had better grades, I probably wouldn't have gotten a job with Schlumberger. I might have actually had a quote, real chemical engineering job that I, would have assumed I would have had years before, just, when I chose chemical engineering. And so I'm telling these high school students this. And of course, at some point it clicks like, okay, well, you should still strive for the best grades possible. You should still want the best GPA. You should still want great internships because, that gives you plenty of opportunities. But the point of my message was ultimately, I still had some sort of end goal in place. And a lot of it was built on, building relationships and maybe even having fun. And again, a dangerous message to the wrong audience. But there are times where just following the book and, acing everything is not the best course of action. I mean, we hear all the anecdotes, right, about, a typical CEO or, all these great historical leaders were C students. I don't know quite how the data, bears out on that, but the reality is there is some truth for striving for mediocrity because as I see it, short-term mediocrity can lead to long-term extraordinariness. Extraordinariness is it's a word I looked up. I promise it's actually real. Extraordinariness. Okay. Anyway, this is the beauty of going live, right? So anyway, find some time to be mediocre. Find some time when you might be go on things that don't really matter and understand how that might lead to better long-term results. Again, working with a lot of hardworking people, find times where good enough is all you need, even if that's not your ultimate objective. Moving on to another item here, playing off of Nike's famed slogan, just do it. So we're familiar with the Nike swoosh here. I have half a swoosh and half a Nike logo here to represent the idea of just doing it halfway. Just half do it. Doesn't sound very motivational, right? Be like if Larry the Cable Guy and his famous motivational slogan, get her done. What if he said, get her half done? Doesn't have quite the same ring to it, right? But there are circumstances where that might make sense. And fortunately, with this embrace of agile methodology and minimally viable products, people and companies have gotten to the point where, again, they'll throw something together that's half done just to see if it makes sense and go back to the drawing board if it doesn't, or maybe even just scrap the project. And again, I think that's great that there's things that I apply in my personal life. Same thing. And again, you probably do so too. And before you hang a picture on the wall and put a nail there, you hold it up, right? Or you move it around. You don't put it all in place and call yourself done and then revisit it in a week. No, you kind of play around. You half job. You see how it goes. If you're building a large boat, if you will, you can build the bottom part and see if it floats before you build everything else. Why? Because you couldn't invest a whole bunch of time, a whole bunch of energy, a whole bunch of money in something that ultimately doesn't make sense. And one of the parallels to this is in the oil and gas industry when it comes to DUCs, drilled, uncompleted wells. So what's the deal with DUCs? Well, investors always want to know about how many DUCs a company has because that represents some investment that the company made in wells that they've started to drill or finished drilling, but have yet to complete. And from a capital standpoint, you could argue that those are even less than half done because typically, maybe you're 20, 30% invested in terms of the location that you've built and the amount that you've spent on drilling thus far. And the completion is going to make up far more than that. But for all intents and purposes, you could say that those wells are half done. And is it a bad thing to have a lot of ducks? Well, potentially, if you're strapped for capital and you've got all this money sitting out there, yeah, that might not be efficient. But at the same time, what does it do? It gives you flexibility. By doing things halfway and having all of these drilled uncompleted wells, you've done a lot of the hard work. You've gotten your permits. You've drilled you've built the location. You've drilled the wells. You've gotten past a lot of the points where anti-collision issues could be a concern. And you've gotten to the point now where whether or not you've drilled a horizontal, you can more quickly turn these wells online. You can bring in your completion crews and you can get them online. You can look at prices. You can look at service costs, whatever it happens to be. Those ducks give you flexibility. They're half done. So they're not all bad. Now, again, this is the same type of message. I'm not telling you as a company to go out and have, as many ducks as possible, but we need to recognize that there's value in that flexibility. And again, when I'm working with people, it's sometimes painstaking for me to just extract whatever they've done so far, whether it's a resume or a cover letter for career folks, or whether people are working on some new project at work or in their personal lives, or they're building a business. Just send me what you have. That's a simple request. And it's so difficult for people to do sometimes because they want to give you something that's more polished. But the reality is it's inefficient. Send me what you have and I can take a look. I can ask questions. I don't care. I know you're not done. But people, and hopefully you're not one of them, are just too afraid sometimes to do that. And so I implore you, just half do it. Just half do it. See what those results are. Share it with people. Get feedback. And forget your ego. Forget the fact that you're far from being done. Take advantage of that flexibility, just like an oil and gas company taking advantage of the flexibility of having drilled uncompleted wells that they can go ahead and complete at a moment's notice. So with that, moving on to the fifth and final item that I had here for today. And of course, it's procrastination. And you can go on the internet and you can find no shortage of procrastination quotes. The one I have here is, I'm not a procrastinator. I'm just extremely productive at unimportant things. And what I'll say to this is, if you're going to procrastinate, do it. Do it well. Just be conscious of it. Be aware of what you're doing. Make a decision to procrastinate. And if you're doing something that, brings you some pleasure, or maybe you're going for a walk and it actually brings you some health, you get some sunshine, some vitamin D instead of working on whatever project you're supposed to work on, do it. Just be conscious of it. And after the fact, stop kicking yourself. Because one of the biggest things I see with people, and I talk about this a lot, is individuals who are afraid to make decisions, or after they make a decision, they kick themselves. Well, guess what? If you're conscious about procrastinating, if you're conscious about taking a nap when you got to get something done later on in the day and there's a deadline, if you're conscious about sitting down and vegging out and watching a TV show, that might not be a bad thing. And this is especially true, again, for those of you who might be in transition of some sort, where you're faced with these false choices, where you either have to wake up every day, and if you're looking for a job, that is your job, right? I mean, it's so cliched and it's so true, but people who do that sometimes forget to take vacations. They forget to procrastinate. And if you're conscious about it, that's okay. If you're spending 2 hours a day watching TV when you could be contacting people and sending out resumes and picking up the phone, whatever it happens to be, not so good. But again, if you're conscious about it, it could lead to long-term sustainable results instead of just following some sort of motivational speech blindly. So with all that being said, again, I welcome any comments, any feedback that you might have. I'd be happy to weave in any of those despair.com items that you might have. And along those lines, I will start with one that, again, John Stansberry shared beforehand, and it's one on change. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change history, usually by rewriting it. And you can see here from despair.com, there's the poster there. And, John shared this. My first thought from this, again, humorous despair.com poster, which is not a sponsor. You can go ahead and purchase them if you will. I happen to have received 2 of them as gifts myself. So I can recommend them as a satisfied customer / recipient of them. But anyway, what this made me think of was companies that are in transition. In this age of constant mergers and acquisitions, one of the things that you may find when the acquiring company takes over, of course, is a slight revision of history. And this tendency to look at the previous company as, either good or bad, or in most extreme cases, to almost dismiss everything they did as bad, and we're going to take their resources and we're going to do things right. Or maybe if it's a true merger, this false idea of, picking and choosing, everything was either good or bad, and not necessarily meeting in the middle. No matter how much they'll talk about best of breed and all of those types of things, inevitably what people do is they oversimplify things. They rewrite history. They assume that one of the companies had to be doing something poorly, when in reality, they may have both been doing something poorly, or they may have both been doing something halfway decent. And, so I expand upon this in a podcast episode I did. It was the last episode of season 1 back in November, a couple of weeks after the election, where I talk about transitions of power and talk about how you don't always want a peaceful transition of power. In fact, sometimes you want to rock the boat and you want to choose something other than option A or B and meet in the middle. Now, obviously, again, talking about a message that is not for all audiences and can be completely taken out of context, especially in light of the January 6th issues at the Capitol. Talking about not always wanting a peaceful transition of power can be dangerous. But again, the point is, sometimes we rewrite history. A new team comes in, a new administration, if you will, a new leadership team comes in, and they completely undo everything that was done before and bring in all of their own people, and they bring in all of their own ideas, which again can be a complete destruction of intellectual capital. It can be a destruction of money. It certainly can be a destruction of morale and time and energy. And I talk about that more in that podcast. But I think this quote here about change and the fact that sometimes some leaders will happily rewrite history is very important, especially in today's oil and gas industry, where new leaders are constantly coming in and leading organizations that are newly merged. And for organizations that are going through an identity crisis of some sort, this can be, I say catastrophic, but it can be catastrophic when you automatically start dismissing the ideas of remaining employees from an acquired company. So be mindful of that, and be mindful of that in your personal life. And, I guess one final note to expand upon this particular despair.com poster is that, and keeping with the election theme, if you will, is that yesterday here in Pennsylvania, we had our primary. And of course, in, a off-cycle election year with not much on the ballot, you don't get a ton of turnout. And in fact, half the ballot was empty positions. And, if you wanted to write in a candidate, you could have done so. But what that reminds me of is the fact that sometimes you want to write in a candidate. Sometimes you don't want to just dismiss option B because you won, right? Sometimes you don't want to dismiss everything the previous administration done. Sometimes you don't want to dismiss everything a previous company did or their talent did. Sometimes you want to meet in the middle and you want to write in a candidate. And sometimes when you do a figurative write-in ballot, it can lead to some positive or at least interesting results. And again, this happened about 6 years ago for me when I decided to jokingly write my wife's name in for a municipal position that nobody runs for, that nobody actually holds. There's 3 open auditor positions in our township. And I decided, hey, let's have some fun, waste 60 seconds of my time and write her name in. Well, lo and behold, a couple weeks later, we get some formal documentation in the mail from the county elections division addressed to her, declaring her the winner with all these instructions on what she needs to do to get things certified and this and that. And, long story short, the moral of the story is sometimes you write in results, even though you think that it's a foregone conclusion that A or B are going to be the only options, and it can lead to results. And in that particular case, it wasn't necessarily positive because she wound up having to spend her time calling around to the county and our township to find out what the story was and to understand that these are positions that are actually just filled by third parties. So even though it's officially on the ballot, nobody needs to hold it, but she was welcome to call herself the auditor for the next 6 years if she's so pleased. So all that being said, don't be afraid to write in a new idea, meet in the middle, and definitely don't cross off somebody else's name or somebody else's idea just because you happen to emerge victorious. Moving on to any other comments here. The less is more from a LinkedIn user. Yeah, less is more is definitely one of those overused phrases. CEO here, Toby Rice, EQT, he was interviewed a couple months ago in a magazine, and I think it was the Hard Energy interview where he says that, you could be bigger and better. And I thought that was very astute, right? Bigger isn't necessarily worse, more isn't necessarily more challenging. And again, I don't know if the context for this comment is that, less really is more in light of some of the things we talked about, but it is definitely an overused phrase sometimes where when it comes to talking and the length of this podcast, however long it's getting here and however long I'm rambling on. Yeah, less is more. I understand that. But there's times where more can be more for the right audience, which I guess, all comes back to the initial disclaimer here. Everything we talked about today is not for every audience. Not everyone should be hearing these types of comments. Not everyone should be told that there's a time and a place to be lazy and maybe you need to lower the bar, maybe you need to take a nap. But the reality is sometimes bigger can be better if you're more efficient, if you do things the right way. And you need to be conscious about whether that's the case. Or to help make you more conscious, you need to have the right resources around you instead of this cacophony of leadership and motivational things that could very quickly and very easily steer you astray. So with all that being said, remember that you don't always need a motivational speaker. You certainly don't always need a cheerleader to help get you to your ultimate destination. In fact, there are times where motivational speakers and cheerleaders and everything you're scrolling through on LinkedIn and the books and tips and tricks and everything can be unsustainable. They might lead to short-term success, but there's no such thing as short-term sustainability. That is an oxymoron. And if you're listening to oxymoronic motivational speakers or leaders who are just tossing out phrases, you could be in trouble. So don't do it. Lean on resources that can help you along. Lean on coaches that could help survey the surroundings and help you make better decisions and cut through all of the noise and tell you what they're seeing and help you see the same thing so that you can make a more sound decision. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what's the goal? Well, for me and for the people I work with, it's threefold. It's to grow, protect, and sustain. You want to continue growing. You want to protect what matters most. You don't want to protect everything. And of course, you want to sustain momentum. But if you're listening to the wrong resources, you're overemphasizing the wrong resources, or you have to look up some motivational quote of the day each and every day, even though it slips out of your head by the time you're done drinking your first cup of coffee, that's not going to do you any good. You want to be focused on continually growing, protecting the things that make sense, and sustaining momentum throughout the rest of your career. No matter how much success you've had, you want to continue sustaining momentum. And so with all that being said, ask yourself today, how is my embrace of all the conventional motivational leadership stuff out there unwittingly damaging my ability to lead my team, lead my company, and lead my family? And as you ponder that, please allow me, Joe Sinnott, to thank you for subjecting yourself to today's content. And for more unconventional content, even if some of it might come across as demotivational for the wrong audience, please go ahead and visit theenergydetox.com. And until next time, please remember that the long-term sustainability for you, for your career, for your family, for whatever it is you're most focused on is far more important than short-term victories. Thanks again.